Cohen, and the second session is about narratives. Now, I am not a student of Rav Froman. I'm a student of Rav Kook. I am coming from the Gush Emunim headspace, more or less. And one of the things that Rav Kook teaches is that we all live in our perception of reality. Each of us lives in our own narrative. Each of us kind of lives in our own movie. And the way we perceive the world is really how we experience the world. For example, there might be people in this room right now who are cold. There might be people in this room who are hot. There might be people in this room who are bored. There might be people in this room who are interested and really engaged. There might be people in this room who are angry because you've heard things you haven't really heard before and you're not comfortable hearing. And we're all having our own unique experience right now. Each of us is having a unique experience. We're each the protagonists of our own movie. Right? We're objectively all in this room together, but having very different experiences in the room. And I would argue that Israelis and Palestinians, for the most part, have been living in two completely different movies for the last 100 years. It's a completely different conflict. It's not one conflict that we're sharing. We really are experiencing the conflict different. Not just, I think I'm the good guy and he thinks he's the good guy. It's that what we think the conflict is about is so different. And I can see this even by some of the questions that are being raised from different participants in the audience, that we really have to, even some of us who come from abroad, really have different perceptions of what this conflict is all about. And when I use the term narrative, by the way, I'm talking about a collection of facts that are selectively chosen and contextualized within a very specific ideological worldview. Okay? Meaning that there are millions of facts. There really are. When you talk about the conflict here, the last 150 years of history in this country, there are millions of facts. And they're important facts. And no political side in this conflict has come with all the facts. That would be impossible. None of us are capable. There's just too many facts. So what each of us tends to do is we take a collection of facts that we believe are important, and we take those facts and we structure them in our heads in such a way, we contextualize them within a certain ideological worldview, and that becomes our narrative. So for example, there are different facts that are important to different people. I noticed to a lot of people, a lot of Israelis and to a lot of Israel supporters abroad, when we talk about 1948, a central piece of information is how many armies did Israel fight. Like that's an important piece of information to Israelis and to Israel supporters. A really important piece of information to Palestinians is how many Palestinian towns and villages were destroyed. And I think it'd be an interesting experiment to see how many people in SJP, in the Students for Justice in Palestine, know exactly which armies participated in that war, and how many people in Stand With Us know how many Palestinian communities were destroyed. I think those facts are just, the facts that are so central to one side are irrelevant to the other. Because we really are living in different movies, and different facts take on different importance, different pieces of information take on different significance in the movies we think we're living here. So what I try to do, my approach to peace, is really to try and take the two narratives. And the truth is it's difficult because there's really more than one movie on each side. There are multiple Israeli narratives and there are multiple Palestinian narratives. For example, I'm not sure that a person from North Tel Aviv who votes Meretz is really living in the same movie as a Jew from Beit El who votes for Naftali Bennett. Right? Those are also different movies, but I think for the most part, Israeli society can share one broad tent movie, and Palestinian society can share one broad common denominator movie. So I think the answer really, if we're going to move forward, is to try and take both movies, see what's true about both, and try to construct a larger movie that's really inclusive enough to encompass both ostensibly rival movies. Meaning, instead of having this living in our own movie, instead of Israelis living in the Israeli movie, where not only are Palestinians the antagonists, not only are Palestinians the bad guys, But we're superimposing identities, we're superimposing motivations, we're superimposing ideologies on the Palestinians that are not necessarily how Palestinians see themselves or the things they feel motivated by. And I think it also works in the reverse. I believe that Palestinians often superimpose identities, motivations, and ideologies on Israelis that have nothing to do with how we experience ourselves. So I think it's extremely important for us to be able to recognize the movie the other is living in, the narrative the other is living in his mind. It's not fake, it's true, that we're, for the most part, telling the truth about what we say about ourselves, but getting it wrong when we talk about the other. So the only way forward, in my opinion, is to really see the other's narrative, see the other's story, and ultimately create a bigger story that's inclusive enough to encompass both ostensibly rival stories. So what I'd really like to do is ask Osama and Hila to present their stories. You know, we'll have a Palestinian story, we'll have an Israeli story, and then what I'll try to do afterwards is see if we can put them together. Maybe we will be able to tonight, maybe we won't be able to tonight, but usually this is something that works out pretty well. So without further ado, who'd like to go first? Hila? Okay. Ladies first.
Can I stand up? Okay. So, first of all, I would like to say that I really like to ask the audience to temporarily tonight liberate themselves from any previously solidified perceptions of the conflict and of narratives and of identity, and momentarily enter my world in order to understand the story of the people I'm part of. So my name is Hila. I live here in Israel. And the fact that I'm native to this land is something that I've always taken for granted. And the reason I take it for granted is not because I was born here. A lot of people think, I think of myself as indigenous because I was born here, but that's not the reason. The reason is that I come from a people who originated in this land. This is my ancestral homeland. It's where our culture is from, it's where our language is from, it's where we had a history of kingdoms, Malchut Israel, Malchut Yehuda, and it's where we had sovereignty here. And really, it was only due to the colonization of our land and a crime committed against us by Assyrian, Babylonian, Roman empires, and other empires who came and colonized our land that our land was ravished and our people were dispossessed. And we were forced to preserve our culture, which is a Semitic Judean culture, in the cold winters of Europe or other places where it just doesn't fit. Both sides of my family, those who came from Morocco, those who came from Romania, participated in the process of the ingathering of the exiles, in which the fragments of our tribes that were scattered around the world reunited in our land. And both of my families had to actually fight their way into this land. My mother's side of the family came from Morocco. They were a wealthy family, and they chose to endanger their lives, to abandon all of their belongings, their wealth, their money, everything they had, and smuggled their way through France, ultimately into the land of Israel. But really, they were not kicked out of Morocco. They chose to leave Morocco and enter Israel out of the hopes for coming to the land of Zion. And my grandma tells me how she came here and kissed the ground like a lot of Jews. My dad's side of the family from Romania came here. They were captured by the British and deported to Cyprus, like a lot of Jews the British were preventing Jews from entering the land. And so both sides of my family basically present examples of Jewish struggle to enter the land of Israel. But the truth is that this struggle was not only an individual struggle of individual Jews, but actually also a national struggle of our people to liberate our land from British occupation. Basically, where our ancestors failed to liberate our land from the Romans, we succeeded. We viewed ourselves as successful in liberating our land from British occupation. And indeed, Jewish freedom fighters were motivated by tribal yearnings of an entire nation, and viewed themselves as indigenous to this land, were willing to risk their lives and fought to liberate this land from the British. And they did, and the British left. And for us, that meant the beginning of a correction of an historic injustice that was committed against us many years ago, but not only led to the suffering of our people in exile, but also, mainly for us, it was preventing us from our national self-determination and from reaching the goals of our people, from completing the mission our ancestors began. So this is the essentials of the story of my people. We lived here, we had sovereignty here, we were occupied, we scattered, and we gathered back. However, in recent years and not so recent years, our story, our narrative has basically been corrupted. Our story has been completely turned upside down. In the eyes of the international community and a lot of other people in the world, I am actually a colonizer in my own land. I'm a settler, colonializer, white person who entered this land, who had no right to this land, and they completely negate our story. They completely erase it, twist it. But the truth is that I'm a Jew. I was born in Israel, and I was born not on April, but on Kavbet Adar Vet Tafshin Mem Vav, which is the leap year on the Hebrew calendar. I descend maternally from Levites. My great-grandfather, Saba Lefai, from my mother's side, was a Levite. My family, the men in my family still use tefillin, like the ancient tefillin found in Qumran, that our people still use thousands of years later. And next month I'm going to be celebrating with the rest of my people the Judean revolt for independence on Hanukkah, which is a national holiday that we've had for many centuries. Even after I hear, and I have heard for a million times, Jews refer to Yehuda and Shomron, to Judea and Samaria as the West Bank, it hurts me. I cringe. I really find it hard. And I can literally cry when I hear people talk about dividing Jerusalem. Chas v'shalom. But the fact is that the idea that we're foreign to this land, to Israelis especially, is so ridiculous, really, that most of us are not even aware that this claim is being made. We're not aware of the fact that people are claiming that we're colonizers, that we don't belong here. So we're not aware of it, so we don't debate it. And those of us who are aware of it think it's just too ridiculous to discredit. Like, we have a history here, don't you know? We're Jews, this is Judea. We don't have to prove anything, so when people come to us with accusations of occupation, we start talking about how, Israeli inventions and security, and we don't say the obvious that we're indigenous to this land. It's noteworthy to mention that this self-identification as indigenous is not only what helped Jews when they came here to liberate the land from the British, and also what helped our people liberate so many parts of our land in 1967, but it's also why I believe Hamas today are unsuccessful in kicking us out of here. And the reason is because terrorism is an anti-colonial tactic that's used to drive away colonialists. But when you have an indigenous people and they're being pushed off their land, not only don't they leave, they fight harder. They say, hey, this is our land, we're not colonialists here, so if you're going to try and push us out of here, we're going to get harder. And this is what's happening to Israeli society. Every time there's a war, they're not saying, okay, let's leave the land. They're saying, we're going to push harder, we're going to fight, we're going to give up our lives, and Israeli soldiers go to battle and risk and do give up their lives. What else?
You'll have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay, I'm just about to wrap up. So just to wrap it up, we of course know who we are, and we know our history, we know we're from here, we know we're indigenous to this land. So these accusations don't really make us flinch, but what they do is they make both sides suffer. They inflict suffering on both sides, and they they basically stop the possibility of peace, because when the other side refuses to acknowledge how we see ourselves, there's no opportunity for real peace, because if you don't acknowledge the way I see myself, you view me as foreign to this land, and I view myself as indigenous, there's no real interaction. So that about is it, just to say this is our ancestral homeland. We are an indigenous people. We are a Middle Eastern people. We're Hebrews. We're from here, and we have a right to be here. And just one last sentence. I would like to emphasize that for our people, since we had a kingdom here, 2 kingdoms here, and this is the way we view our nation, for us, sovereignty is very, very essential. For us, self-determination means sovereignty over the land that our ancestors possessed. Thank you very much for listening.
If I may now present Osama and Jan to talk about the Palestinian narrative. Well, please go ahead.
Okay. So as I said before, my name is Osama. You need mic or I have to stand up?
The mic is basically out.
So my name is Osama. I was born in Jerusalem, in Silwan. My grandfather is the only one who stay here in Israel, Palestine, from his family. Our family used to be the biggest family in Silwan. Now we are something like 50.
City of David, if not everybody knows.
They know it very well. So most of my family are now all over the world, in Europe, in States, in Jordan, everywhere. The Palestinian narrative about Israel, first of all, as I said before, Jewish people used to live here long time ago, even before the Zionism started and before Israel. They used to live next to each other. That's what I know, at least, in many places since 1920s and 1910 and until 1925, when the Zionism started and Palestinians start to recognize that Jewish people are trying to build a state in their own state, which is Jewish state. They used to sell their lands to Jewish people. It wasn't even, no one used to prevent them, like to sell lands for Jewish people before 1925. After they recognized there that Israelis are building, or Jewish people are building settlements here, and they are planning to have a state here, then the problem started. Then they stopped to sell lands to Jewish people. Then Hajj Amin Hussein started to go to Hitler, and he's not the one who asked him to burn the Jewish people. He just was asking him about solutions, how to stop these people from coming to Palestine. Our narrative about Jewish people, that these people came here and they wanted to build a state on our land. They wanted to kick us out from this land, exactly. And every time they like being stronger, they have more weapons, they have strong gangs, and they start to attack Arabic villages around them. So that's how Palestinians start to make groups in order to fight the Jewish people, but the British always was bunching the Palestinians according to our narrative and help the Jewish people to have more weapons and to be stronger. Then what happened that the UN make offer to divide this land in 1947 for 2 states, and not the Palestinians, all the Arab world refused to have 2 states because Palestine, it wasn't a state. It never were like a Palestinian state. This land called Palestine, was called Palestine, like Jordan also, it wasn't a state before 1946, like most of the Arab world. It was one land under the Turkish emperor rules, and then the British and the French. So most of the Arab world wasn't really independent. Yeah. So since that time, the enemy start between the Palestinians and the Jewish people since 1925, as I said, and it continued until 1948. 1948, when Israel occupied 78% of historic Palestine, they don't just occupy it. They occupy it, they kick people out from their villages, their homes, their lands, and they make massacres and kill people in Deir Yassin and in Tantur and many Arab villages, and they don't allow anyone to go back to his home. Even the Arab who still live in Israel until now. For example, someone from Khubbeze, which is village, and he live in Haifa now, they don't allow him to go back to his village, even if he have Israeli citizenship and even if he's serving the Israeli army. So they don't allow any Palestinian who went out from his village, and they start to demolish these villages, like a lot of villages which is not appear now, like South Hebron. You can find Iraq al-Manshiyya and Deir Aban and many villages there. They just demolish all these villages. So that's how the enemy starts between Palestinians and Arab world. And in this time, the Arab world make a very big mistake by kick out the Jewish people from the Arab countries. And that was something like some emotions. They just feel mad and kick the Jewish people from the Arab countries, and we, the Palestinians, most of us think it's a very big mistake to kick them, because it's not fair to kick anyone from his home and his land.
Osama, 2 minutes.
Only?
16
I didn't
years.
start yet. Okay, so I will make it shortly. After this 1967 war happened, and Israel, let's say, took the West Bank. We live under military rules, and the problem was that we didn't feel equal anytime. By the way, let's talk about how most of the Palestinians live and how I feel. Living under occupation, what it means for us? It means that you are not equal. You are not human being enough to be equal with everyone who's living around you. I have problem with settlers. I don't have problem with their kippah or with their prayer or with their Torah. I love all the religions, and I don't mind if any Jewish guy decided to come and to live with me in my home in Jericho. I will welcome him, and I have a lot of Jewish friends, even more than Palestinians right now. So my problem is we don't have equal rights, guys. These settlers who want to live with us in peace and equality, taking most of our lands by force. They didn't come and buy it from us and they want to live in it. They took it with the force of the army and the police, and they kick us out from this. Because of these settlers, we have more than 60 checkpoints in West Bank. Because of these settlers, we get 20% of the West Bank water only. That's how the Palestinians think.
3 days a week.
3 days a week, that's the best situation ever, which is in Jericho. But in Bethlehem, it's worse.
Bethlehem, it's 1 day a week.
That's why when you go to, if you visit any settlement in West Bank, you don't see the water tanks on the houses of the settlements, because they have 24 hours water. But in the Palestinian areas, you will find any building, they have more than 10 black water collectors in order to collect water for the rest of the week. So that's my problem with the settlers. It's not their religion. It's not they are Jewish. The discrimination. And let's go far a little bit. In some places, the apartheid. Why in Hebron the settlers allowed to walk in the street where the Palestinians are not allowed to walk in? They split the street, or they divided the street to two sides. And I don't believe with this. I'm talking about Osama now because the time is short and it's really confused to talk about these things in 10 minutes or 20 minutes. You said 45, man.
Blame the Jew.
Yeah, and you see, he's the owner of the place. So for me, Osama, I don't care about the states, I don't care about the flags, I don't care about names. We don't want Jewish name with Palestinians, and we don't want a Jewish state with Palestinians living in it, and we don't want a Palestinian state with Jewish live in it. We want a democracy state where everyone can live in peace and equality, and that's what we really need, to live like everybody in this world. And it's a craziness to keep fighting for piece of land. And if you look at the mountains, there is a lot of empty lands, no one live in it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Osama and Yuda.